For small systems that are critically charged, we use the small disposable cylinders of hydrocarbon through a bottle connector that also has a dead weight to bulk up the overall weight of the cylinder on the scales. The scales we're using are simply postage scales with an accuracy of plus or minus 1 gram. The cylinder is a gas offtake cylinder, and we'll use it in that orientation to purge the line with vapour before we invert it to liquid fill the system. There's a control valve actually on the dead weight of the bottle adapter. Simply open and purge in the normal way. Ensure while you're carrying out all of these processes, you continue to monitor the area with the hydrocarbon monitor and that ventilation is maintained. We're now connected, ready to charge. The cylinder is inverted so it's liquid offtake, and on this system we've connected to both the low and the high sides. What we're going to do initially is charge liquid into the high side of the system. Before we do this, ensure that the gauges are hooked so that they don't act on the weight of the scale, which is a 1 gram increment scale and very delicate, while we're opening the control valve. Before we start to charge, we tear the scales so they're reading 0. This particular system has a charge weight of 65 grams. It is possible, depending on the ambient temperature in the centre on the day you're doing your assessment, that 65 grams will go directly into the high side in one charge. If you can't achieve the whole 65 grams into the high side, we'd simply get as much in as we can of that 65 grams, run the system and charge the remainder into the suction as a vapour. On this occasion we've managed to charge the full 65 grams into the high side of the system. We do, however, need to ensure that what has been weighed out into the gauge line is also added to the system, as this has already been weighed out of the cylinder and is part of the critical charge. To do this, we'll simply isolate at the cylinder outlet, and when we run the system, we'll draw that remainder of the liquid from the gauge lines into the low side of the system. Prior to running the system, and to minimise the loss of refrigerant in taking the gauge lines off once we are running the system, we're going to disconnect the high side, leaving the refrigerant in the line to be drawn into the low side of the system. To do this, we're going to isolate the ball valve, remove the high side connection as quickly as possible and catch the high side. The refrigerant that we've weighed out of the cylinder that's trapped in the line will be laterally drawn into the low side when the system is running. To switch the system on, plug it in and switch it on remotely. When you switch it on, there will be up to a 5-minute delay before the compressor starts. When the system starts, allow the operating pressures to normalise, and then we will draw what's trapped in the high side of the gauges and the common yellow hose back into the low side of the system. To do this, simply open up the high side of the gauge manifold and then gently bleed the high side and the common yellow gauge line pressure into the low side of the system. And wait until the low side of the system has returned to the normal operating pressure. And simply isolate the manifold and remove the low side connection and cap the system. When you've finished charging and you've removed all of the equipment from the system and the system is capped, just do a final check and ensure that the system is correctly labelled with the flammable gas triangles.